Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much indeed, Jeffrey. It's a great honor to be allowed to speak to you. You've asked me to speak for about 5 minutes. It's never very easy for a professor to speak for 5 minutes, so, but I will try and do what you said and keep to some broad headlines. You may not remember, Jeffrey, but I do that the last time you kindly invited me to speak to your group was in Gibraltar. And in a very odd way, the meaning of Gibraltar is something that I would like to leave you with when I finish what I have to say, because for me, Gibraltar should not be seen as an insult to Spain. It should not be seen as a place with peculiar Barbary apes crawling all over it, but it should be seen as a symbol both of Britain's determination to play certainly a role in Europe and certainly a role towards Arab North Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, but also, of course, as a site of security, intelligence gathering, and defense. I certainly hope Britain never gives up Gibraltar for those reasons. And what I'm going to suggest to you in my remaining 4 minutes is that, like Professor Clark, I think it would be a disaster if Britain were to leave the European Union, but that in the European Union, instead of leaving, we should be leading. The symbol of Gibraltar, I think, should serve as a symbol, particularly for what the centre conservative views are probably everywhere on Europe. I will try to suggest to you that the importance of security and lawful intelligence-led security policy, the importance of lawful orderliness, lie not only at the heart of every conservative in the United Kingdom, but lie in the heart of every centre conservative person in the whole of the European Union. And that Britain and the current British government in its security policy actually speaks for very many people throughout Europe. I agree with so much of what Professor Clark has said, yes, absolutely. But with one thing I profoundly disagree, and that is when he talks about the lack of leadership, particularly by Germany at the moment. I would say, ladies and gentlemen, the problem is not the lack of leadership, it is the wrong leadership. It is a faulty leadership. And one of the great things you can do if you're a pointy-headed academic like me is you really say what you think. And the beginning of September, German National Radio asked me for my thoughts on Frau Merkel's policy of open doors and windows towards the migrants streaming into the European Union. And at that time, I said, I thought Germany was behaving as if it were a hippie state, totally ignoring its own regulations and ignoring everybody else's regulations at the same time. And I have never had such an enormous public response from people in Germany. And I think I had 150 emails of support from people I'd never heard of within a few hours of that broadcast going out. It was then repeated on the BBC World Service, and many other people got in touch with me because of that. There is leadership from Germany, and there is leadership from France. The trouble is, it's the wrong leadership, and it's a leadership that is oblivious of the primary duty of a government, a national government, to deliver security. And how right you were, Jeffrey, when you said not only is the answer to every problem in Europe not necessarily more Europe, actually, the Lisbon Treaty itself makes it clear that national security is the preserve of the nation states of Europe. So every which way there is complete confusion, and only the British have the authority and the voice and the track record of having done a good job to make this point in Europe. That's what I want. So to lead to the conclusion of what I have to say, it is self-evidently the case that we live in an extremely dangerous environment at the moment. And Jeffrey has just given us another example. People being taken as hostage, people being killed. The two issues that concern me are the internal threat to our nations and the external threat. Both issues are linked by the menace of Islamism, and again, I agree with what Professor Clark says entirely. This is what is causing the tectonic plates to shift, and this is a very, very important aspect of this. When it comes to the internal threat, I would argue Britain provides the model for the rest of Europe in good intelligence-led security activity. And we lead certainly the rest of Europe when it comes to effective prevention of terrorism. And the Prime Minister's latest policies, where he says we have to tackle not just violent extremism, but extremism tout court, is absolutely bang on, spot on. And it is the job of people in education, above all, not just the police, to ensure that young British Muslims understand that liberal democracy enables them to reach their potential, and that if they actually had the sort of state they're brainwashed into believing they would have, their future would be impoverished and a disaster. And that's a matter of education. Returning now to the external threat. As I say, they're connected by the menace and the danger of jihadist Islamism. I've said to one or two people, for those who are my age, I'm 67, Paris represented a city for people who loved life. How appalling is it? For the second time in 2015, the city that is designed for people who love life should be attacked by those in love with death. And how badly, in my view, has the French government failed its own people? It's failed its own people because it has bought into the Schengen Agreement, which is not being followed by its main supporter, Germany. When Frau Merkel opened her doors and windows, as everybody knows, she did not stick by the Dublin Agreement. She had no idea who she was taking in. And that may have been good enough for Germany, but she also needed to know that in taking in people to Germany about whom nobody knew anything, she was also taking them in to the rest of Europe, even into the United Kingdom, ultimately, even though we're not part of Schengen. Not only did that break the Schengen law, she was also breaking NATO law, because Article 4 of the NATO treaty says that each member nation of NATO has to secure its own borders. That is a basic NATO rule. Again, Germany not only didn't secure its own borders, it prevented the securing of the borders of Greece and many other nations as a result. So, what is proposed? President Hollande has decided that he will not interfere with the Schengen agreements. That is madness. And everybody in Europe with half a brain knows that it is madness. And let me just explain, for the record, why it is madness. Yes, we are taking in hundreds of thousands of people. The German foreign minister has said at least 1 million people each year for the foreseeable future. And, of course, it isn't just 1 million people, because it is 1 million people and all the people who go with them. And let me just say, like many other English families, my own family has immigrants and refugees, and indeed, like the royal family, Germans in its background. I am not opposed to the idea of asylum by any manner of means. If there had not been an asylum policy, I wouldn't be speaking to you here this morning. However, not everybody that comes, as we know, is an asylum seeker. The European Union's own figures show that 50% of the 500,000 people who've come in the past 4 years are not asylum seekers, 50%. So we've got a situation where we're having people come into the European Union. We don't know who they are. The only way of keeping a track on them is by border controls, by seeing who they are. It is only through border controls that we can stop the free movement of weapons. We all understand about the free movement of labor. We all understand about the free movement of people. But we haven't thought about the free movement of weapons inside the European Union, because those people who come, these hundreds of thousands of migrants who reach our shores, do not come with Kalashnikovs. They do not come with rocket launchers, as were found in Paris. They do not come with grenades. They pick them up in the European Union. So at a stroke, the idea of saying, as the French governor said just this morning, no Schengen, it's madness. And you cannot deliver security. The final thing that I would say is President Hollande speaks about a grand union. And I've been asked many times in our media here what I think will happen after the Paris attacks and what I think ought to happen. And I point out the two are entirely different. What ought to happen is that President Hollande should have invoked Article 5 of the NATO treaty, and that the NATO states, including the largest and strongest European country, the Federal Republic of Germany, should have got their boots on and sorted out the particular problem of ISIS. But I don't think it will happen. Rather, President Hollande has gone for not just Article 42.7, which may well be illegal because it conflicts with important parts of the other bits of the Lisbon Treaty, and in any case is very equivocal. States offer to do what they're able to do, but it's what they're able to do is a matter of course of definition. Not only Article 42.7, but also to include Russia. To include Russia because I was going to say the presence of America in this, but actually it isn't the presence of America, it's the absence of America in this that is so disturbing. To include Russia, I think, would be fatal. It would change entirely the balance of power in Europe. It would legitimize what Russia has done in Ukraine, and we just heard about that. We should not forget the appalling tragedy of the Russian Metroliner being shot down. But also, we should not forget the appalling tragedy of flight MH17 being shot down with Russian missiles above the skies of Ukraine. And to imagine all of a sudden that President Putin comes in on his white horse, sorting out peace in the Middle East and increasing his influence in Europe, again, I would say is complete madness. So I will conclude by saying, yes, Michael is absolutely right. This is a very, very dangerous neighborhood now. People of the center-right understand better than anybody else that if you fiddle around with people's security, the only people who benefit are the extremists on the one hand and your enemies on the other. Yes, sometimes your enemy's enemy has to be your friend, but that has to be a last resort. Therefore, we should be leading in Britain, not leaving, and we should be doing all we can in terms of intelligence sharing, which is already very good, it has to be said. We already do share intelligence. And above all, reintroducing border controls, making it sure that we know who people are, and if we don't know who they are, we'll have to wait until they can be properly screened. Thank you very much.